Hi, if you're like me and decided to follow the Cherno's C++ tutorials using the command line interface, and if you got stuck on the static linking portion, then you've come to the right place, because I went through the trouble of reading the documentation and figuring out how to do this via the command prompt, the developer command prompt. I will make a video also on how to do dynamic linking, but let's just first kind of do the static linking first, because there's going to be multiple changes. So the reason I decided to use the command line interface or the developer command prompt is because eventually I'm going to be moving away from Microsoft completely. I'm going to be installing Linux. I'm probably going to try to use CMake. Kind of just sick of Microsoft and the way that they do a lot of their things and whatever. But also, while Visual Studio is a nice IDE, I just find it to be a bit busy on the screen when learning. So like if I'm developing, maybe sure, yeah, okay, I might do it because it automates a lot. That's really helpful. But I don't like the way that they have like a solution file to run your program that runs the IDE to run your code and whatever. Like, it's nice that they have a debug mode, and I can't debug from the command line interface or from the command prompt, but I get to at least control where everything goes, and I can learn how to point to the files myself and everything else like that. So I just think it's better for learning, just my opinion. I'm kind of sick of Visual Studio in general. I think it's too busy on the screen. And this lets me kind of get a deeper understanding of what's going on. So right here on the left, I have my command prompt. I'll come back to that in a minute. But right here on the right, I have my 3 files. Now, I'm not using the glfw or whatever it was, because for some reason it's not working. And I don't think it's compatible with Visual Studio 2022, even though they do have the libraries in that folder. I don't think that it works correctly, or something's going on where I run into a bunch of problems when I link. Also, this makes it simple that I just have like one CPP file that just prints, and a header file for that print CPP file, and then a main that calls that function right here. That's it, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to actually make a .lib file, a static library, and then we'll pretend, if you make your own static library, if you're compiling this, there's no reason to make the static library. You would obviously just compile it into your code. But, we can at least learn how to make a static library and then pretend that we downloaded it and then learn how to use it. And I'm going to show you a few kind of quirks or things that kind of go into it. But first things first, I have to actually get to that folder. So in the command prompt, I'm going to do cd, and then let's see, this one says sublime static. There we go. And if I do dir, I can see that I have my static libraries.cpp, and you can see the folder structure right here. Okay. I have dependencies, or I have the static library in there. I have this dependency folder and this static libraries.cpp. I have a dependency folder with 2 other folders. The bprint has my bprint.cpp, and the include folder has the bprint.h. Okay. And then I have those 3 folders or 3 files open over here. Static libraries.cpp, iostream, references the header file, main method. This is just to show that the main method is running, and this is to show that it's correctly calling this method right here, bprint Ben's print function, my name, and we'll see this when this function runs, and we'll see this when the main function runs. And then the header file is just a reference to it. Okay. So the first things first, we have to actually convert this into a library. So what I'm going to do is actually I'm going to cd into that. So I have dependencies, and then bprint.cpp, and I'm going to do cl /c to just compile it. And then we'll do bprint.cpp. And don't worry about this. I forgot to do one thing. These are just warnings, so don't worry about them. Nothing actually went wrong. If I actually pull up the folder, and you can see that I have the obj file right here. So it worked. The thing that kind of went slightly wrong was, or the thing that I kind of recommend you doing is though CLC, but then also do EHSC, which is a standard error handling, which is what the EH is error handling. And then when you, so that you don't get any of those warnings, it just says, okay, you're using the compiler, you're going to use the linkers, all rights reserved, this file, and then you're done. But once you have that file, you can just type lib and then reference the obj file. And that's it. And then if I now we have the bprint.lib. Okay. Now if I go back to my original folder, whoops, yeah, whatever, that works. Just to make sure I'm there. Yep, CLS to clear the screen. Okay. What you can do is first you do CL to call the compiler and linker. You do EHSC to not get all those warnings and to error handle just fine. Then you do -i as an include path, and the include path is going to be that folder. Actually, the include path is going to be where the header file is. So dependencies, and then I add an include folder. And then I want the whole folder, so I just end with that. And then I need to call all my files that I need to compile, which is the CPP file, the static libraries.cpp, and the bprint.lib. So the CPP file that has the main method and the library file. Since I want to output the name of the class, I want to output static libraries.exe. So I'm going to start with that one. And then I will also go to dependencies. And then the bprint.lib, that should be everything. If I hit enter, everything looks good. And then now if I do static libraries.exe, it works. All right, something else to note though. If I go back here, I don't know if I have to delete these, but I'm going to. If you have a bunch of dependencies, like a bunch of libraries, you don't have to specify them one at a time. You can just use a wildcard. But the problem here is that because I have a CPP file and a lib file, if I try compiling this, it's going to run into some problems. Let's see. Error link void already defined in bprint.obj, because it tried to compile obj. Well, it tried to compile the C++ file and made another obj file, and then tried to use the obj file to compile into this file, into the executable, but then it tried to do so again with the static library. That is actually why I like to take my library files and move them, into a new folder called lib. And then this way, when I call that wildcard, I can just reference the lib folder. So back here, I'll just hit up to call the last one. Instead of bprint, I'll go to lib and then wildcard. There, that worked. Yeah, now I can just use the library, or I'm sorry, I can use the wildcard and call this whole folder, which would have a list of print lib files. Okay. I don't know why I'm even mentioning this, but the last thing I want to say is it matters where you call these lines of code. I believe the lib file will be, I think the obj file is always made in the same folder that the CPP file is in. And then the lib file is made wherever you're calling the lib command. But I'm not entirely sure, so let's try that. Let's test that together. All right, I have my dependencies, my include file is right there, my header file is right there, and my lib, so let's get rid of that. Okay, first I want to compile this, and I want to do everything from the lib folder. So I'm actually going to cd into the lib folder, and then I'm actually going to compile, so cl ehsc /c to only compile, and then go up a directory and then go into that folder. Okay, and then that made that obj file in the lib folder where I'm at right now. All right, so now if I just do lib obj, that puts the obj, I'm sorry, the lib file in the same place. And then now if I cd back to the, I can do the original command, cl ehsc, and then -i to add an include path, dependencies, include, and then I just reference the two files. Dependencies, lib. Actually, I don't want that first. If I do that first, then the first file it compiles will be the name of the executable. You can actually do fe, I think it's fe : random name.exe, and then I can call my static library.cpp, and then dependencies lib star. Okay, and that will actually make the executable called random name. So there you go, a little bonus thing there if you want to learn how to name the executable something else. One more thing that I wanted to show that I forgot to mention was that you don't have to do the -i, so you don't have to do like ehsc and then this part where I go to the include folder. You don't have to do that, and then blah 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 blah. You don't have to do that if you have the dependencies kind of listed here. So if I did dependencies include like that, and you have to switch it to quotes because you're not, if you're not doing the -i, the -i or the -i, whatever you want to call it, the -i is the include path. So if it's not in the include path, then you have to use quotes because it has to tell it that it's a relative position, right? So you'd have to do it that way. So in that case, we would just do, why can't, okay, ehsc, let's do fe random name.exe, static library.cpp, then the dependencies lib oh, I didn't save it, damn. All right, now this will work. There we go. And then there's my executable. And that's it. That should be the last thing you need to know. You can kind of mix and match and kind of infer a few things from all of this. But yeah, feel free to mess around with this. But this should make things pretty easy by just using these three files. And I purposely put them in separate folders so we can exactly see this kind of stuff. Like, how do I do it if it's in another folder? How do I link a library? It's great that they are in the same folder, but what if they're not in the same folder? Just to keep things organized. So I hope this clarifies things and helps. And thanks. I'll be back with a dynamic linking video.